Hi, Dr. Alan Lecipian at the University of Idaho.
And Jim May, University of Idaho.
We wanted to talk to you today about why clinical research may be important and the benefits of clinical research.
I get a lot of our students, have almost always have a background in traditional laboratory research, right? Controlling all the variables, controlling and breaking it down into kind of a smaller element that somebody wants to research. So how do we respond to somebody that says, like, why is this a priori important? Why does this matter opposed to what we're typically trained in?
Yeah, and the question is, like, why study one case or multiple cases, and is that of value? Because if you look at traditional research and our levels of evidence, most of the time you see an individual case or multiple cases being very low down on our research. But the reality for us is that if we don't have the evidence of that, or you don't have the evidence of that in your practice, that makes a big difference to your patient. And one thing I learned early on is that, let's say a particular technique has 99% effectiveness in a trial, and you can't make that happen, then your patient doesn't care that other people have found that to be the case. Everybody gets better from this, but the person that they're working with doesn't know how to do that. Well, the only way that we would know that that's the case is if you're actually studying your practice, reflecting on your practice, and then making changes in that practice. And in those ways, the clinical research process is extremely valuable. I would say that in certain ways, we also need the better, more well-controlled studies, the randomized controlled trials, the big cohort trials, the massive trials, to see how often certain things occur in patient care. And so really what we tend to target in this area is one's individual practice. And then we also handle white crow studies. A guy named Gary Schwartz introduced me to that term. He's at the University of Arizona, and he talks about a white crow study being a study that you're really only trying to say that not every crow is black. And so if you're trying to say that in a study, or you're trying to explore whether that's true, then you really only need to find one white crow. And so in that case, a case series or a random event, or seemingly random event, or an unusual event is worthwhile because you know that it exists. Once it exists, then there's a process that we can go through. For example, once we know it exists, we can say, okay, well, now how often does it exist? Who does it exist within? Is it different in this group or this group? We can play with the different variables. And when that's the case, at the end of that, we might be able to find out why this is working. As we go, we can develop theories, but in the middle of that, really what we're trying to do is just figure out, does this happen? How often does it happen? Is it happening in my practice?
Yeah, so it's the balancing point, right? From the controlled research to the local. And if we can't capture the local, then we have to consider how we are moving forward with our care.
Yeah, and if I was going to hire somebody for a clinical practice-oriented position, I would want to know what evidence they have that they're effective. I think we look at that in every other area, but typically we haven't broached that topic in clinical practice. And as somebody who hires people, I would want to know that. As somebody, let's say if I'm in a professional athletics, or high-stakes athletics of some sort, be useful to know the data on how effective you are with conditions that you normally see. And so generating that can also maybe help you get a job, or help you explain your value to people who are paying you, which is useful as well. But at the end of the day, we really want to know how good we are so that we can make changes and we can improve things. We also, our patients want to know how good we are and where we need to work. And if I realize that I'm really bad at treating these certain things, then it gives me an area that I can focus on if I choose to do that. So at the end of the day, in my world, there's room for clinical oriented, so some of the even messy clinical oriented research and laboratory research, and a combination between the two.
Yeah, but probably helpful to view your clinical practice as a component of your research, and not separating clinical practice in one area and research in another. We should be constantly researching our clinical practice.
Yeah, and that turns into that translational researcher, that person who understands the literature, they understand practice, they can speak both languages. They're really the bridge between practice and the laboratory. Yeah. And when we value all of these, roles that we play, teacher, researcher, scholar, clinician, human, all equally, and we prioritize all equally in our practice is going to be more effective. People are going to be happier, and we're probably going to get closer to what is authentically happening. Because even though laboratory research is kind of our gold standard, I like to call a lot of our gold standards iron pyrite standards, right? Fool's gold, because many studies that are done in the laboratory and look good on paper, the people who are performing the clinical test or the study aren't necessarily the experts a lot of time. Not to say that there's also potentially design flaws and all those things. And if there's nobody who speaks the clinical language, and the sterility of the laboratory research has actually affected kind of the veracity or the truthfulness of the data that you're collecting in practice, all of a sudden your practice and the research you're doing in there doesn't reflect what's actually happening. It's reflecting what you're measuring, and you're measuring what you're comfortable measuring, which may not be what you need. So those are just some ideas of maybe why we would consider doing some of the messier clinical research. And there's a zillion others that we get into in our program and in a lot of our presentations. And maybe if you have questions, you can put those below in the comments, or you can even add in some of the ways that you found clinical research or laboratory research to be useful, and how they work together, or how they really have to work separately at times. So it'd be nice to hear from you. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you.